Good afternoon and welcome to another exciting episode of the Art Block with Ant and Derek. I'm Ant.
And I'm Derek.
And if you don't mind, I'll toot my own horn a little bit here. It's my birthday today. Yay, I'm 43 years young.
All right.
Keep all your gifts to yourself. I don't want anything. Derek, today's subject, we've had a lot of, we have had a great response to our first episode that was about comic books and film.
Exactly.
So to coincide with today's guest, we decided to do a episode in which the topic is
our comic books literature.
What do you think, Derek?
Well, if it has words in it, I guess it would be considered literature. According to Wikipedia, comics, or what some would say a graphic novel, it's a narrative work in which the story is conveyed to the reader using sequential art in either an experimental design or in comic book, traditional comic format.
Right.
And I've read some comic novels myself, especially back in middle school, where they had certain classic novels adapted into a graphic novel form, such as Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer, Treasure Island, and even I think Don Quixote by Cervantes.
Oh yeah, they covered a full gamut of them. If I recall.
Yes.
But
they were mostly in paperback. They weren't in like the regular comic book.
Well, in your opinion, is it? You think it's literature, right? So you think
yes,
so?
yes.
Right. And I do too. I agree with you. I think it is. I think going back a little bit and getting a little history of it, I think the reason comics weren't considered literature for so long was because it was in America they got popularized around the 20s, 30s. That was around the same time that Pulp Fiction came out. And I don't mean the movie, Pulp Fiction, fictional pulp stuff. And the sci-fi stuff was coming out, and no one at the time took that stuff seriously. It wasn't considered, highbrow literature.
Yes,
It was so because I think comics came out with that, and then the addition, of course, of you having a lot of pictures. It's almost like a kid's book. It's a lot of drawings. It's art. It's kid-like.
So in other words, it's
simple
kind of
writing.
Simply more childish, not more adult theme.
Right. And it was just looked at that way. I think really, I know the argument is comic art and comic books literature. I think really started in the 80s, if I remember right, is where the argument began, and or got serious, I should say. And of course it is. I think it is too. But the graphic novels, what I think made people start realizing, maybe this is a more serious art form.
So that would have been the time. Was that around the time when? Before they became movies. Was that around the time when Sin City became popular? Or
actually, actually a little before that. Now you bring up Sin City 300, which were done by Frank Miller, and Frank Miller, yes, he did Batman: The Dark Knight Returns.
Okay.
Which was one of the 80s graphic novels that was one of those, ones that started the boom, along with Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons' Watchmen. The Pulitzer Prize winner, Spiegelman's Mouse. That won a Pulitzer Prize, and that's where I think comics started
became
really
more serious.
Exactly.
Yes, Mouses was the one about where you had depicting of the Holocaust.
Exactly, with mice and cats, Cats were Hitler and such, the Nazis and stuff. And so I think that's what helped bring it along into a serious art form. I think you're right, just because it's words and literature in general, and because of themes comics take. Comics deal with historical, cultural, and economic times. Which is. I think they cover these serious what's the word I'm looking for? Serious issues would say. And I don't think there's a question as to whether it's literature or not. But for the longest time, it just wasn't taken seriously.
Really, it shouldn't be debatable. If it's printed, aside from, I guess, newspapers, aside from as a reference or informational type of a periodical, if it's printed and it is for entertainment value, then yes, it would be considered literature.
Right. So now let's step to a little a little bit off the beaten path,
Right.
and let's go into. We both agree it's literature.
Yes.
So now, what is your take on when comic books shake it up, so to speak, and as Will, our producer director, says, upsets the fan base, so to speak, by, for example, changing costumes of these iconic characters, killing off iconic characters, bringing them back. You know, what do you feel about that? Are you a diehard, you know, I like the old ways.
Well,
Don't mess
I mean,
with my Superman
I guess
costume.
the only way it
Don't
would be
mess with mine.
controversial if comics or graphic novels became way too graphic. I mean,
Right.
You know, I mean, obviously there's, you know, I mean, when it gets to a point where you have to, like, you know, have to put ratings on them like you do with movies and video games, then yeah, it could be, considering, you know, especially if you have young children who are fans of them. I mean, and granted, like you were talking about, like changing ideas, doing reboots, like with Spider-Man, you know, throwing away the traditional red and blue suit with the black suit that he had for a while, which later became Venom.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Amazing Spider-Man number 252, if I remember right, was the
Okay.
issue where he got the new black outfit. But see, that was a case, that's one of the few cases where it didn't bug me too much. Of course, I love the original Spider-Man costume, but I didn't think the black one was that bad. I really did not think it was that bad looking. And then what they did with it, I was really pretty happy and excited about. I think the way, you know, they made it become Venom and all, I think that was really a pretty nice move. As far as Superman, you know, when Superman had that blue lightning bolt looking costume, I thought that was horrible.
It was like it was kind of
yeah.
like ripping off Captain Marvel in a way.
Yeah, it was, you know. And then I remember Aquaman had that time period where he had that costume change, and not that Aquaman's original costume is that great in my opinion,
Yeah.
but you know, and then things like when people die off, you know, they kill off somebody, and I like to call it the Bobby Ewan factor, where they kill them off, but then they bring them back, you know, which is a complete ratings thing.
That's one of those soap opera effects. Like first they did, and then they're not, but you know.
Right, and I'm completely against that. I'm 95% against the costume changes, but I'm 110% against killing off characters and bringing them back. Because I think, as I said earlier, comics they do reflect our culture, our times, the economy, whatever. And death is a part of life, a way of life. And I think if you kill people off, I think they should stay dead.
Right.
You know, I mean, example, you know, Bucky. We talked about the Captain America thing back in our first episode, and you know, everybody knows, if you know Captain America, his sidekick Bucky dies early on, and then they brought him back recently as the Winter Soldier. You know, this whole other character, and they've done that
in the graphic novel or in
just
the movie?
in comics.
Comics,
He has returned as a different character, as a new character after all these years. You know, and they've done that with Alpha Flight's Guardian / Vindicator. Now, one person they haven't done that with, which not yet, but I think it was issue 420 of the Incredible Hulk. Jim Wilson, his one of his best friends, the young black guy. If you remember, he died of AIDS back in number 420, and you know, they had the big AIDS issue with the Hulk, with him losing his friend Jim Wilson, Bruce Banner's friend. And as I know right now, they haven't brought him back yet. So, you know, I don't think they would, but
You know, considering that AIDS is a very serious and deadly disease.
But isn't getting blown up by some bombs something that should kill you too? As it was happened with Robin, you know, Jason Todd as Robin. That's a whole other thing. You go to the Batman series, Death in the Family, where they killed off Robin. Of course, it wasn't Dick Grayson; it was Jason Todd. They brought him back. Wow. You know, yet the Joker killed him. You know, blew him up in a warehouse or whatever, if I recall. I don't know. We know why they do it. It's for ratings. It's for comic sales. It's to bring them back. You know, it's a soap opera effect. But
yeah,
I think you die in comics. You die in movies.
You die in real life.
Stay dead. You know what I mean? Stay dead.
I mean, yeah. I mean, it could be worse. They could be undead, be just like zombified versions.
Well,
that's a whole other
different.
genre.
If you're doing zombies, okay. If you're doing zombies or vampires, okay, that's fine. You know, but
True.
Comic books, you are a superhero. You have superpowers, but you're still human in a way. Most of them, you know. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back with our guest, comic book writer Nathan Edmondson.
Roasted Cafe and Lounge is a wonderland of great coffee, tasty food, good people, and fun times. Come in and try our world-famous date shake. We also offer beer, wine, and alcohol, as well as many flavored tobaccos to try out in our beautifully made hookahs. Curiouser and curiouser, Roasted Cafe and Lounge, located on 442 2nd Street in downtown Macon. Check us out on Facebook and join us for a wondrous experience that will have you coming back for more.
And we're back on the Art Block with today's guest, Nathan Edmondson. How are you doing?
Good. How you doing?
Great.
Thanks
great.
for coming, Nathan.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Glad to be
Nathan,
All right.
Nathan is a comic book writer, successful comic book writer who resides right here in Macon, Georgia. So Nathan, tell us a little bit about, before we get into what you've done here, some of the stuff you've done, tell us about your career, how your career started in comics. Were you always interested in becoming a comic writer, or did you go to that of late?
Yeah, very much. I wasn't always interested.
Right.
I didn't even have, much of an appreciation for comics growing up. I wasn't much of a reader.
Right.
I knew I wanted to tell stories. I thought I'd get into novel writing, and I was working in Washington, D.C. I happened to move in down the street from another local comic book artist named Tony Harris, and he very graciously sort of exposed me. We became close, and he exposed me to what comics was now, and sort of that it is now fertile ground for all kinds of fantastic ideas and great storytelling, and really the most fertile ground for new and original stories. And I started to see that and become more aware of how wide and popular comics were. But it wasn't for a long time that I had any real inclination to, work professionally in comics. And eventually I had an idea for a story, and I worked it out as a story, and at some point realized that it might make a good comic, so I pitched it to one of the major publishers, and it was picked up. So it all sort of happened accidentally.
Right. So comics was your first published medium, right? Or did you do short stories before that? Any novels or anything like that?
I had some short stories published. I'd
Did
written, a novel, but like I said, I was working. I was the director of international programs for a nonprofit group in Washington, D.C. So I was sort of on another career path, and I wasn't actively pursuing anything that creative. But it was it was there, and it was fighting to get out.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about, I'm familiar with two of these, of course. I've read them. I think they're really good. Tell us about, first of all, we'll go with Olympus. Olympus was a series, 4-issue limited series about Castor and Pollux, the Gemini twins, who were basically gods that were on Earth to do Zeus' bidding, so to speak, right?
Yeah, his lackeys.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about, we don't want any spoilers because we think you guys should go out and pick this up, read it. It's pretty good. Tell us a little bit about, how this came about, the idea, the thought process of this, what you liked about it, the finished product, things you wish you could have done better,
Well, I mean, starting from the last question, working forward, there's always something you wish you could do better. I mean, I think as a writer or any kind of creative professional, you have to get to a point where you just ignore that kind of critique.
Right.
You look at the sort of what can I build upon, but the sort of the thinking of what could I have done better, it's just not going to do anything for you.
Right.
So I don't really think of the book in those terms.
Right.
The book came about, though, because I was reading at the time The Voyage of Argo by Apollonius of Rhodes, the story of Jason and the Argonauts. Right. And Castor and Pollux are two of the Argonauts, and And there's a couple of brief lines that describe their personalities, and then describe the fact that talk about the fact that they were granted immortality because one brother loved the other so much that he wanted to give up his life when his brother was killed. He'd rather die than live without his brother. And Zeus, seeing that, gave them both eternal life. So I sort of thought, well, what if they were still here today? What if the Greek myths persisted to today? What would that look like? And they're exiled from Earth, they're separated, we've abandoned them, we've kind of gone secular, as it were.
Right.
So you get to talk a little bit about, about nihilism and about that idea of we have gotten rid of the gods, but they're still there. And so Castor and Pollux are that bridge between. But really, at its heart, it's just a fun action series. These two guys running around trying to do Zeus's bidding and have some fun.
So it's a fictionalized version of the Greek myths, of Greek mythology, or at least this one particular chapter?
It is. I mean, it brings in many, it imagines, well, if the Greek myths were real, what happened between then and now? Where have they been and what have they been doing? And this sort of looks back. So you get to see a lot of the major characters, but one thing that we didn't do that a lot of other stories will do is say, for example, they'll bring in someone popular like Medusa. Well, to us, Medusa is dead. She was killed, so there's no bringing her back. So we look at the status quo of the Greek myths as they might be today, and we had to create some of that, bridge that history.
Right. And then you also had a series called Who is Jake Ellis, which is also very good. I think this is my favorite of what you've done, and this is a five issue series, and basically about a hitman and his guardian angel, so to speak. And tell us a little about this as far as how this came about, and I guess what you were reading at the time, thinking about at the time,
Well, Who is Jake Ellis is a story. As you said, it's this mercenary spy.
Right.
And the reason he's so good at what he does is there's an invisible guy who tells him what to do and how to do it. Right. And his name is Jake Ellis, and the whole story came about because in Augusta, Georgia, there's a street, Jake Ellis Lane, named after, I think, a 70s Masters golfer, not a champion, but a golfer. And I just thought it was a great name. And within 2 hours of driving through Augusta to Macon, I came up with the story. I don't really have much of a explanation beyond that, but it's now Eisner nominated, which has been a great, that's sort of the
congratulations,
an Academy Award in comics. So that's really been a very esteeming. And it was named one of NPR's top 10 books of last year.
Oh, wow.
So it's gotten some great critical acclaim, and worked with a fantastic artist. We're very happy with it.
Right. So you didn't. So the name wasn't a takeoff on Mayor's the Macon Mayor's Jack Ellis.
Jack Ellis.
It's a very different book.
That's right. Another thing. I got another question, real quick, since I'm such an Alan Moore fan. I love Alan Moore as a comic writer and all. Is the character John Moore? Was that name taken? Was that an homage to Alan Moore?
No, not at all. It actually the character was originally named Terry Moore, which was just named after somebody in my Facebook contacts list. I just saw a name, thought that works, but then after a few days, Terry didn't work. So.
Right. Okay, then you also have something called The Activity. I mean, this is your most recent, correct?
That's
The Activity.
Correct. It's
this is your newest
series.
Okay, tell us a little bit about The Activity.
The Activity is based upon a real special operations group, one of the special operations tribes, a real group that is very secret and undisclosed. And in fact, we've gotten a couple of people giving us little slaps, telling us to be careful about what we talk about as we pursued the research. It is very real-world based.
Wow.
But it's about a group that does they are the new tip of the spear. They do the bleeding-edge tech ops. They're the first responders. They are the shadow behind the shadows, executing lethal ops around the world and protecting sort of liberty. But it's all rooted in realism. We have advisors under the Joint Special Operations Command in the Pentagon, the U.S. Army Entertainment Liaison's Office, 3rd Special Operations Group, and these people, they review our scripts, we can ask questions, and they just help us to see that our exciting action thriller series is rooted in reality. So it's ongoing, it'll keep going for ostensibly a couple of years.
Right. And then you had and I apologize, I haven't read this series. You have also The Light.
The Light.
Anything about that you can tell us real quick?
Yeah, the artist was the artist who did the Surrogates, which was made into a film.
Right.
And it's a book about a father protecting his daughter from a virus that kills anyone who looks into electric light sources. So it's sort of a high-concept horror thriller.
Okay. And then what is it, The Grifter you were telling me about earlier? The
Grifter I did for DC Comics as part of their New 52 relaunch. He was a character that previously existed in the Wildstorm universe, for those who know what that is.
Right.
And he was just a con man who was the only one who knew that there was an alien invasion coming, and he was fighting them off. So just a lot of fun, a lot of action. It was a very difficult time at DC with all the the massive relaunch, a lot of cooks in the kitchen. So it was it was an interesting project to navigate. But I've moved on from that to some other DC projects now.
Right. Okay. Well, we're going to take a break here in a minute, and we're going to come back with more from Nathan Edmondson. And before we go, we'd like to thank all our sponsors as usual: Middle Georgia Talent, Athens Mattress Outlet, Roasted Cafe and Lounge, and Trout Harris. We'll be back in a minute.
What kind of madhouse is this? Is this any way to treat a man? Where's your humanity?
Athens Mattress Outlet, proudly serving Athens and the University of Georgia community. Featuring the Energy Series Pillow Top for only $3.99. Avoid the hassle of moving a mattress when your student leaves home to attend UGA. Athens Mattress Outlet is an online retailer based in Athens and now serving all of Georgia. Call or click today.
The only good bed is an Athens mattress bed.
And we're back on the art block with our guest, Nathan Edmondson. Now, Nathan, we had our topic question, are comics considered literature? And what are your thoughts about that?
It's certainly a very contentious subject. I think that there are certainly limitations to comics that that prose doesn't have. In comics, because of its format and because of the limitations, length and opportunity for dialogue and some of those things, are naturally going to lean more towards entertainment than towards literature. Now, of course, you've got to define what those terms mean, and I'm not sure I'm qualified to do that. It's certainly not right now without thinking about it a little bit more. But that said, I think that there are many of the comics that just fall straight into the entertainment, entertainment reign. But there are a lot of writers, Alan Moore being one of them, absolutely, who really push that envelope to push comics into literature. And his books, for example, are impossible to deny as literature. They become so important to the canon of literature. So he proves that it's achievable in comics. So why other writers don't get there, why other writers don't do that, I'm not sure. With the activity, part of what we're doing is we are striving to reach an audience outside of comics. The book is not trapped with the convention of comics. It's written more like a TV show, like The Unit, for example. It's very real world. It's not hyper dramatic. It's not. They're not a big cliffhanger at the end of every issue. These things are things you would typically find in comics, but by no means do you always find.
Right.
I guess going on a offshoot of the topic itself, I did mention that there were some literature classics such as Tom Sawyer and Don Quixote that were made into graphic novels. Not saying that unless you have you or your company have any plans for it, but do you think graphic novels kind of get younger people to become more
well-read?
Well-read, yeah, become
Go
more
into other real books?
into literature to be, become more, since people are talking about how the literacy rate is going down, and do you think that be a way to encourage the reader to become more well-read, as he said?
Yeah, I think anything that gets kids reading is fantastic. If you're going to read a comic adaptation of Don Quixote, that's great. However, you still need to read Don Quixote.
Right.
Because there's no way you're going to get what that book offers in a comic format.
Right.
So if it draws you into it, if it gives that opportunity, I think it's great. But, translations and adapting things, that's generally, at its heart, marketing motivated.
Okay.
So, so again, you understand that it separates it from the original work.
Right.
So, who are some of your influences? Which I know that can be a sort of tricky or dangerous question, but as far as writers, who are your influences?
Well, I don't have many influences in comics because I didn't come from reading comics. Contemporary authors, Michael Crichton has been enormous influence on me.
Right.
Started reading his books when I was in second grade or first grade. By the end of second grade, I'd read everything he'd written, and that just showed me what it meant to be an entertaining storyteller.
Right.
But really, my background is in classic literature, whether it's Apollonius of Rhodes, Homer, whether it's Cervantes, Mary Shelley, whether it's Flannery O'Connor. I mean, these are the things that, that sort of I look back at when I'm thinking of writing a story.
Right, right. So, without, I guess, incriminating yourself, who do you think are some other great comic book writers currently working? Who are some of your favorite comic book writers?
Without a doubt, I certainly would name Robert Venditti. He wrote The Surrogates, more recently The Homeland Directive, and he's been adapting the Percy Jackson series. Very sharp writer. Brian K. Vaughan is another one I recommend. He sort of crosses the spectrum from more entertainment to more literary comics, and he does so well.
Right.
But he is a...
You like Frank Miller? You've been a Frank Miller
I'm
fan?
a big Frank Miller fan. I think I like what he does, and he does exactly what he wants to do.
Right.
And I might also mention Brian Clevenger and Scott Wagner, who do a series called Atomic Robo. Great for kids, great science and math education.
Okay.
Well.
All right, well, we'll be back to wrap this show up shortly. Stay tuned.
The moment that I laid eyes on her, I was hooked. She had a glow that said, "I'm here. I'm waiting. Speak to me. Look at what I have to offer." As my eyes scrolled down her sleek, inviting, and provocative frame, I realized that this was no middle-of-the-road dame. She supplied opportunity, character, security, and a healthy boost to my ego. She had me coming back for more.
We're back, and we want to wrap it up by saying thank you, Mr. Nathan Edmondson, for coming, joining us here on the Art Block. And if any of you are interested in reading some of Nathan's stuff, which you should, I highly recommend. Who is Jake Ellis, written by Nathan Edmondson, drawn by Tonchi Zonjic. The Activity, written by Nathan Edmondson, drawn by Mitch Garrards. Olympus, by Nathan Edmondson, drawn by Christian Ward. And who illustrated The Light for you, and Grifter?
Brett Weldley illustrated The Light, and Grifter was Scott Clark and Cafu.
Okay. Thanks for joining us. See you next week on the Art Block with Ant and Derek.